Hi everyone. So this is Social Change lecture number 1. This lecture accompanies the reading by Harper and Lee, Introduction, pages 1 through 12. Alright, so what is social change? How would you guys define social change and how can we measure social change? I'm interested in this, and that's why I also had you write in the discussion forum for week 1. What do you think when you hear the word social change? Because as this image shows, we can think of a lot of different things, right? We can talk about people, peace, technology, passion, design, community, environment. All these things can mean social change to people. Harper and Lee write about the fact that we live in the times of change, and they compare their lives with the lives of their grandparents. Think about it. Think about how your life is different than the life of your grandparents. We can think of changes in technology and communication. I mean, think about computers and internet, which is a pretty recent development. We can talk about changes in medicine. I mean, think about how drugs and vaccines have changed. How nowadays people can live with diseases that not too long ago were deadly. We have changes in family life. We have new forms of relationships. For example, gay families are now more common than they have been ever before. Also, single parent families and so on. We have also availability of different foods. I mean, where better to talk about it than in New York City, where you have a different restaurant on every corner, and you can get different food delivered to your door almost at any hour. We have different forms of entertainment. I mean, from video games to computers to television to movies. Think about how even movies themselves have changed from the being silent movies at the beginning of the era, and then nowadays we have 3D movies. And of course, access to education and jobs, which was not accessible to a lot of people before. Minorities, women, they did not have access to all these resources. All right, so let's talk about the definition of social change. Harper and Lee on page 5 define social change as the significant alteration of social structure and cultural patterns through time. Awesome, right? What does it mean? What do we mean when we talk about social structure, and what are cultural patterns? So, social structure refers to the stable network of social relationships that occur in our lives. I like to think about it in terms of regularities and patterns in our lives, patterns that we as humans have developed and engage in on a regular basis. So, for example, if you think of social structure, you might think of the fact that most of us are born into some form of families. Many of us, if not majority, go to school. Then we either go to college or try to get a job. Then we move on to start our families, our own families. And then our kids go through the same structures. They also go through school. They also try to get a job. And then they also get married and have kids of their own, and so on and so forth. So this structure constantly repeats itself with certain changes, of course. So, what is the difference between social structure and culture? Well, Harper argues that if social structure is the network of relationships that we exist in, culture is the so called social software that people share that provides the meaning to our social lives. Because think about it. So, we have these structures that we all go through, but what love means, what family means to us, that differs from person to person. So, culture refers to the shared way of living and thinking, and it includes symbols, which are things that stand for something else, language, which is collection of symbols, knowledge, values. Values are these ideals that we strive for, norms, which are do's and don'ts of society, what we can do and cannot do, and material goods, what we produce as culture, from houses to music, to recipes to cars, and so on. As an example, think about the concept of love and how it differs across cultures. I mean, what constitutes love, how it is described, how it is expressed, what kinds of love are permitted, are all cultural things. Cultures differ on how they perceive love and the importance of love too. And I included this little image because I think it's lovely, this little heart made out of words, I love you, in many different languages. So I just really liked it. All right, so the study of social change attempts to understand the whole picture, meaning that we want to understand the significant structural changes, for example, so changes in population, organizations, economy, political system, and how these are connected to changes in culture, changing norms and values, fears, hopes, and even dreams that people share. So again, I included this little picture of what social change can mean to a lot of different people. So let's talk a little about norms and values and whether they change over time. So I want to ask you if you can think of a value or norm that has changed. And when somebody asks me that question, I often tend to think about the changes that occurred in women's roles in our society. For many, many years, women had just these traditional roles as wives and mothers. Nowadays, women, of course, are employed, have professional degrees, are doctors, lawyers, astronauts. I mean, you name it, right? And I include this little picture because it also makes me think of these traditional gender roles. So, for many years, boys were the football players, and girls were the cheerleaders, and boys were the pilots, and girls were the stewardesses. This, of course, is changing, right? We have many athletes that are women, and we have women who reached, who are not only pilots, but you name it, like I said. All right, so let's move on to aspects of social change that we will study. So we can study types of social change, meaning changes in personnel, changes in the way parts of structure relate, changes in functions of structures, changes in relationships between structures, and the emergence of new structures. And for more on this, please read page 6 by Harper and Lee. Then we can talk about levels of change. So at the bottom of page 6, Harper and Lee explain what they mean. We can talk about changes from small groups to global changes. And sometimes it's easier to understand changes at the small group level because often those are the changes that touch us, but harder to see global changes. But of course, both influence each other. For example, marriage, right? It might seem like a tiny personal issue for the two people who are getting married, but it also reflects larger issues in society, such as the fact that not everyone can get married. I mean, issues of economy, right? How people are treated because of what money they bring into the marriage. How many kids? That's also cultural, right? Because some cultures limit the amount of children you can have. So all these things affect how marriage is perceived. Then we can talk about time frames of change. We can figure out whether these are short time or long time changes, right? And I'm going to ask you guys to think of examples of both. Then we can talk about causes of change. And here things get a little tricky because there's a difference between causes and consequences of change, because in social sciences such as sociology, it is much harder to establish definitive cause for things, right? I'm sure you guys remember from chapter 1 of your, or chapter 2, I'm sorry, of your Sociology 101, where you probably talked about causation versus correlation. In sociology, it's harder to establish definitive causes of things because for example, chemistry and physics, we study people. And people don't behave like particles in physics and chemistry. People have free will, are capable of thought, and change their opinions a lot. So even though, for example, if you set up an experiment in chemistry or physics where you measure something, you don't have a worry that your particles are going to walk out of the room. When we study people will do that. They will walk out of your study. And also, you might ask the same question of a person one time and they'll respond one way, and you ask them an hour later and they might respond completely differently. However, let's talk a little bit about changes that are external, meaning brought from outside. Changes in technology, ideas, styles, diseases. Nature creates these kind of changes, right? For example, the hurricanes Sandy and Katrina. Or we can have internal changes when there are gaps between shared ideals and actual practices, where we have individual differences. there's competition for control of power and scarce resources. For example, the idea of a commitment to non-discrimination and equality in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. Those were changes that came from inside, right? We as society decided that it is not okay to discriminate people on these bases. Then we can talk about change in human intentions, because some changes are unintentional, excuse me. Nobody tried to bring them about, but they happened anyways, such as shifts in demographic, birth rate, urbanization. Some changes are intentional and planned, right? We wanted them and we made them. We made changes. We as humans have human agency and we made changes. Some are intentionally sought out by certain groups, right? For example, Occupy Wall Street, right? It was also intentional and planned, but may not be planned by all of them, right? Elites might have not planned this movement. All right. And then we can talk about more aspects of social change. We talk about change versus other terms. When we talk about change, we can use words like progress, evolution, process, and development. Change is a process, but not all processes are change. And I just want you to really focus on one issue here, that progress itself is a problematic word. We tend to think of progress as movement towards something being better, right? However, that itself is questionable, because better according to whom? Today, we might think of ourselves as a very progressive society, and we are in terms of technology, for example, or medicine. But think how much poverty and death we have. We created a bomb that in a matter of minutes can destroy us all. So think about that. When we talk about, for example, evolution, that's more of a biological notion, right? And development might be more of economic issue. All right. And then just last few points. Sociology and how the study of sociology started studying social change. I mean, sociology emerges as a science in the 19th century when people's lives are going through enormous changes. We can talk about the development of the modern world, from Industrial Revolution, French Revolution, from the fact that we started understanding the world in scientific rather than religious terms. And of course, we decided to travel and discovered new lands. And I put new in quotation marks because they're not really new. They've been there all along. We just thought of them as new. Early thinkers such as Comte, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, I'm sure you guys remember them, they all tried to understand those changes, and although they did not have a common view on these changes, they did agree that study of human society and change could be understood in a general way rather than being just a random collection of accidents that happened to people. They all tried to study changes in society in scientific terms through methodology and collection of facts. And through this semester, we will try to see that personal events in everyday life are connected to broad forces in larger society. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the definition of sociological imagination. And these changes also reflect changes in culture, and how these changes affect us personally reflect larger forces in society. And finally, I just want to share this wonderful quote on social change that I read by not too long ago. So, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, said that we have bigger houses but smaller families. We have more degrees but less sense, more knowledge but less judgments, more experts but more problems, more medicines but less healthiness. We've been all the way to the moon and back, but we have trouble crossing the street to meet the new neighbor. We build more computers to hold more information, to produce more copies than ever, but we have less communication. We have become long on quantity but short on quality. These are the times of fast foods but slow digestion, tall men but short character, steep profits but shallow relationships. It is time when there is much in the window but nothing in the room. Think about this quote when you guys read and reread the Harper and Lee, and as well as the Britzer reading. I'll talk to you guys soon.